Good morning, my friends. In light of recent occurrences, I think that you'll find today's sermon especially uplifting. I know we have had our loved ones sacrificed in this ugly and trying time. There will be peace again, but do not fall into the grips of darkness. Do not become corruptible. Do not become the feast for death. Weakness is the serpent's plaything. For you will hear the trumpets come down. You will see the fiery sword from legions on high come down. Now is not the time for the lamb. Now is the time for the lion.
Welcome back to APN TV Media, your author publisher network. Your host for today, Michelle Myring, and my great friend,
Bob Beatles.
Yes. We're going to get a really great show for you today. The book is written for middle-aged children. And what's nice to know that children can be middle-aged too, not just you and I, Bob, because we're the normal fashion of middle-aged. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do know.
Yeah. Well, the book is The King of Average. And it was very interesting. Gary Schwartz wrote this book. Gary Schwartz is actually an actor. He started off as a mime.
Yes.
Yeah, he was 13 years old, and then he got into acting. He actually wrote some TV shows for children's stations, and he actually is a teacher now, and he teaches Broadway shows. I'll have him explain a little more, but we heard quite a bit, a pretty excellent track record on his part, don't you think?
Yes, yes. From everything I've read, a very excellent.
Very impressive individual.
Yes.
And the book, I found the book to be written, even though it was for middle age, it was for our middle age because there was a lot of interesting dialect in there and dialogue.
There was interesting dialogue. Some of it reminded me of the movie Airplane, but it was, yes, you had to be paying attention to what you were reading there closely because you could miss the jokes, the puns.
It did. It was very punny.
Yes.
It was very punny, right? Well, I can't wait to meet him. We are going to have him on Skype today. So it's going to be a really good show. He'll be part of the screen, and then sometimes we'll be part of the screen, but you're going to enjoy this show. And take heed and write it down because it's a really good book for your children to read. It teaches a lot of lessons. It taught me lessons, made me rethink a few, evaluate my life a little differently.
A little bit.
Yeah, that's always a good thing.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Okay, we'll be right back after this.
I think you have to have a seat for that.
An adventure fit for thrill seekers. A top-notch writing from the master storyteller. Searching for the brutal truth has never been this witty. Peculiar detectives rise above crisscross killings. Thrilling narrative, exciting unfolding of the truth. clever, entertaining, and never predictable. A meticulously written mystery tale. A riveting tale of crisscross murders told in humorous fashion. Fetching Fiona and the sketching detectives solve the crisscross murders by Jack McCormack. Available now.
Welcome back to APN TV Media, your author publishing network. Bob Beadle, a good friend, and I'm Michelle Meyering, and we're going today introduce you to Gary Schwartz, who wrote The King of Average. And long overdue, we're going to let him tell you a little bit about the book. How you doing today, Gary?
I'm fine. Michelle, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Well, let's get started. Why don't you give our viewers a little idea what the theme of your book is?
Well, actually, it's a fantasy adventure story about a little boy who has basically suffers from poor self-esteem. He comes from a very unhappy mom who tells him that he's basically ruined her whole life, and he feels bad about himself. And he kind of buys into that message to start with. And then he has a conversation with himself one day on his way to school saying, I'm not that terrible. Okay, I'm not that wonderful, but maybe I'm average. And he looks at his report card and he gets all C's and he says, yes, I'm average. Then he thinks to himself, what if I became the most average person who ever lived? And that magically transports him into a strange fantasy world called the Realm of Possibilities, where he meets a talking goat named Mayor Culpa, who is a scapegoat, who informs him that the former king of average, Norman the Unexceptional, has disappeared, and they're searching for a new king, and they've heard that he wants to be the most average person in the world. So this sets him off on a big adventure. And he finds along the way friends, interesting, strange creatures, and little men called the Nervous Nellies. And he basically discovers that he's much more than just average in a little village called Epiphany.
The innuendos I loved. You have to explain to our viewers a little bit more than just Epiphany, because the whole adventure evolves around this quest. And the quest
yes, he has this quest to find out what happened to the old king and why the old king decided he couldn't rule the kingdom of average, which was what they call a commonwealth or a mediocrity. And so it's filled with a lot of puns, and he finds through these adventures, he travels to various lands, like the land of Accusia, where people are blamed for everything and put in a dungeon. He travels to Lake Inferior, where the old king is now living, and who was going to sail away on the Sea of Doubt. So he convinces him to let him help him find his estranged children. James himself, the hero of our story, doesn't have a father, and sort of uses this king of average as a father figure. In helping him reconnect with his children, James discovers his own bravery, his own authenticity, and finds through various relationships, he meets a professional optimist along the way named Monsieur Roger, who is a Frenchman, who has in his pocket a little professional pessimist named Killjoy. Just like Kilroy was here, from the World War II graffiti. So the book actually works on a couple of different levels. It works as a sort of Wizard of Oz children's adventure, but I think the wordplay and some of the references of childhood will make it something that adults like too. I laughed in your introduction because you said this book is for middle-aged kids, and it was written for middle grade, 9 to 15-year-olds, but it was also written for middle-aged kids, people who are adults who can appreciate that kind of humor. I was always a big fan of Rocky and Bullwinkle, and
yes.
I kind of wrote the book in that sort of tongue-in-cheek vein. So it's a lot of fun. Hopefully the entertainment will make the message that much more impactful.
Yeah, you know, when I read what the mother said to James, it reminded me of what I'd read that Madeline Murray O'Hare said to her son. She always told him she wished she had had an abortion, which was an awful thing to say to a kid, but and then her son became a Christian. He went the other way from what she did.
Well, you know, it's interesting. There's a lot of children. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and we were called latchkey kids back then. We had parents who were struggling. My parents definitely struggled with issues of mental illness, believe it or not, and so we grew up in kind of we had to sort of raise ourselves. We entertained ourselves a lot. It's not like today. But I think a lot of kids today suffer from one-parent households where the parent might be very unhappy, and this affects your whole life. So I think a little parable, an entertaining adventure story where a little boy can reclaim his own self-esteem and discover that he has unique gifts and empathy is a great lesson kids could learn. But I don't hit you over the head with it. I try to make you laugh.
Oh yeah, it is a great lesson for kids to learn. Yes,
Yeah.
and even though you're laughing, you realize that the kid is struggling. I mean, obviously going through, and all children do at some point struggle with something in their lives.
Well, and all great children's heroes in books, you know, Dorothy, ran away from home because she, James and the Giant Peach, he's an orphan, or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, they're poor. David Copperfield was poor and suffered a lot of adversity, and those are the things that build character, but you can also suffer quite a burden if you don't have that resilience as a human being, and hopefully this story gives you that kind of roadmap to how you might be able to do it. A lot of it deals with helping other people.
It's interesting you said that, because I did find a lot of lessons throughout the book. However, the final lesson in the end, in fact, it was very heartwarming. It kind of brought a tear to my eye. I don't want to give it out to the reader because that'll get the whole book.
Yeah, that's a spoiler.
I'm not a spoiler.
I just come up with a sequel. I just come up with the idea for the sequel too, based on the fact that a lot of people didn't feel very resolved at the end of the story. But I hope the end of the story gives everybody hope.
And it did. It definitely did. What inspired you to write this book? I mean, great concept. Where did it come from?
Well, when I was 11, I was reading a book called The Phantom Toll Booth by Norton Juster, which had that same kind of wordplay about a very bored kid who traveled into a strange land where there were a lot of intellectual puns.
trying to reach is not available. Please call back 19T2. The customer you're trying to reach is not available. Please call back.
Data transfer complete.
The world has turned against this. They have not done it.
Oh my God.
There has been...
All right.
Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned.
Lay hospitalized in critical condition.
Well, my own personal background was that I was raised by two parents who were struggling with mental illness. There was a lot of chaos and a lot of violence in my family, and I felt very sort of invisible. And I was told that a lot of their problems were my fault, and that's a big burden to put on a little kid. So I felt bad about myself. And when I came up with this idea that I'm not so terrible, as a matter of fact, I'm average, and I laughed when I told myself, maybe I could be the most average person who ever lived. And that little kind of joke gave me a kind of spark. It ended up allowing me to become the funny kid in school. And, you know, I studied humor to sort of make myself acceptable to everybody, which led to a career in show business where I could seek love and acceptance from audiences if I couldn't get it at home.
Yeah, and he did
it led
so...
to a nice career as an actor. I'm a very successful actor, and I spent 35 years doing television and movies and voices and voiceover work, and now I teach improvisational acting skills to business and to anybody, basically, all around the world. And so I've had this idea since I was 11, and I decided in 2008, well, I better sit down to write a book about it and copy the sort of style of the Phantom Toll Booth. So although it's not derivative of the Phantom Toll Booth, it does have that wordplay that I really enjoyed. And I'm very pleased that the book has won so many awards. It's been chosen by Kirkus Reviews as one of the top lists of their children's books of 2016. I just won 2 gold medals at the Children's Literary Classics Award Labor Day weekend in South Dakota. So I'm really honored and pleased that the book has gotten such a nice response.
This conversation has been reminding me somewhat of Charles Dickens and the things he wrote, like A Tale of Two Cities, where people are working through their struggles also, but in a little bit different manner. Yeah,
Charles Dickens' childhood was filled with adversity. He was, shipped off to these workhouses and, where he suffered a lot of adversities, and he turned it into these fantastic stories, these adventures that kids have. And that's what I try to do.
Well, you've done very well in this book.
Absolutely. Are you working on any other books right now? Besides
Am I
the
what?
sequel? Are you working on any other books or besides a sequel? I can definitely see what you said.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm about on my 5th draft of my next book called The Benji Loper Caper. And the short version of the book, the short description of the book is basically it's Get Shorty for kids. It's based on my experience in Hollywood in the 1980s as a limo driver, and an actual 14-year-old boy, not very well off, saved up his money to rent a limousine, my limousine. And we took him on a date. He wanted to surprise his girlfriends on this date in a limousine. And I kind of fantasized about the fact that my limousine looked like a lot of other limousines, and what if he got into the wrong limousine after the date and got involved with a Russian jewel theft ring called the Pink Panthers. And so it's sort of a caper. It's sort of a caper movie. It sort of weaves my Hollywood ambitions with a little boy's school crush.
Interesting.
It's called The Benji Loper Caper. Hopefully it'll be out in a year.
It sounds like a good one. So are you primarily trying to write for middle grade children?
Yeah, in a way. What I try to do is I try to write really for myself. So although it's aimed at, I've always been a children's entertainer all through my career. I've enjoyed entertaining children. I think if you can inspire kids, like I was inspired by my heroes growing up, like Red Skelton and Dick Van Dyke, you give a chance to kids to explore the idea that they can be something other than, that they can aspire to different things.
Something other than average. But
I also write to amuse myself. So I put in enough jokes, and I used to do school assemblies with my partner Caleb Chung. We were a comedy team called Schwartz and Chung, and we knew that we had to entertain the kids, but in order to get rehired, we had to entertain the teachers. So we threw in enough jokes for the teachers that they always brought us back.
So now you said Soupy Sales and Red Skelton, not Soupy Sales, Red Skelton and Dick Van Dyke.
Red Skelton, Dick Van Dyke, Danny Kaye, Jackie Gleason, they were all my idols.
Okay. So you're not looking at the basic children's humorists like Soupy Sales and Captain Kangaroo and...
Yeah. As a matter of fact, and I was on a children's show in the 1980s called Zoobilee Zoo, where I played a pompous actor who named Bravo Fox. I was an actual fox. I wore a nose and I had ears and a wig, and
gonna have to Google that.
And they said, he's self-involved and egotistical, but he has to be lovable. So I thought to myself, well, the most lovable character I can think of is Ed Wynn. You remember Ed Wynn?
Yes, I remember Ed Wynn.
So, I did the voice like Ed Wynn would have said it, and you can say terrible things to kids with this voice and get away with it and still be lovable.
Oh, you're good. How'd you last so long as a mime?
I started out as a mime at the age of 13. I ran away from home, and I found myself involved with a traveling teen mime circus called the Now Teen Mime Troupe in Poughkeepsie, New York. And we got a job that summer entertaining the crowds that would follow Pete Seeger along the Hudson River on the Clearwater Sloop. In the 1960s, he went up the Hudson River, cleaning up the river, and with these folk festivals. And we entertained the crowds on the lawn, on the banks of the river, wherever they would put into port. And there we were there with Don McLean and Arlo Guthrie and Pete Seeger and a lot of great folk artists of the 1960s. So that was my first professional job at the age of 13. I ran away from home and joined the circus, basically.
Everybody's dream.
That's interesting. That's almost exactly what happened to W.C. Fields. He ran away from home.
W.C. Fields.
Yeah.
My face.
Yep. He ran away from home, and he didn't even get to start out entertaining at first. He cleaned up bars and restaurants, and that's where he found a place to live.
He was a great vaudevillian juggler to start with.
Oh,
and
yeah.
His patter just went with his juggling.
Well, what happened was when he'd clean up a bar or restaurant and sleep there, at night he'd take the billiard balls out and he'd juggle them.
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
That's how he taught himself.
Absolutely, yeah. And he became a great vaudevillian star and, oh my God, an icon.
Oh yeah, he had a great sense of humor.
Oh, yeah. Very, very wry,
Oh yeah.
How do you like children? I love children, especially girl children, about 19 or 20.
Yeah.
Can't say that anymore. That'll get you in trouble. Well, Gary, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come right back because you're a very interesting character to talk to, and I think we got a lot more show here.
Okay, great.
All right, we'll catch you in a minute.
All right.
We'll be right back.
James isn't the world's greatest kid, but then again, he's not the worst either. In fact, he's just average. When he decides to become the most average kid who ever lived, James is mysteriously transported into another world called the Realm of Possibilities, where he meets a talking goat named Mayor Culpa, who happens to be a scapegoat. Mayor Culpa informs him that the former king of average, King Norman the Unexceptional, has disappeared, and they need a new king immediately to take his place. He has to go on a quest to find out what happened to King Norman, and is joined on this quest by a professional optimist named Monsieur Roget, who has in his pocket a grouchy companion, an equally professional pessimist named Killjoy. Together they set out on a journey of self-discovery that take them all the way from the Sea of Doubt to Mount Impossible, the highest peak in the unattainable mountain. There he stumbles upon a Shangri-La called Epiphany, and that's where James discovers the secret about who he really is. Join James and his friends in this hilarious adventure-packed journey to find self-worth in this heartfelt middle-grade novel, The King of Average.
Welcome back to APN TV Media. Michelle Myron and yes, the two favorite. Well, we have a third favorite now. We're interviewing Gary Schwartz, who wrote the book, The King of Average. Well, there's nothing average about this guy, I'll tell you that. Gary, tell us a little bit more, because it's very exciting, a little bit more about your career and what you're doing now and how this all has to do with your writing.
Well, it's interesting. Like I said, I started out as a mime at the age of 13, and through a lot of different adventures, I ended up in Hollywood when I was about 26 years old, wanting to be an actor. And by that time, I was tired of not talking, so I started doing voiceover work. And I got to do voiceover work on a lot of great movies and television shows in a very interesting niche of show business called looping, which is providing background voices for all of the extras in a scene. When they shoot a movie, they just record the main actors, But if the scene takes place in a crowd, like at a hospital or a crime scene or a hotel, all of the extras are told to be quiet and not talk, but act like they're talking. So they're all, when you see a movie without the sweetening, you see the extras in the background all doing this. And then, because they have to cut the movie together on the various angles so that when the movie's all finished, all of the actors in the background there's no soundtrack. So they bring in a bunch of improvising actors to watch the people in the background and fill in their voice. And it has to sound authentic. So I did that for 16 years, putting voices in the background of movies like Batman Returns and The Prince of Tides, and you get to work with all of the great directors. I worked with Robert Redford and Barbra Streisand, and I got a job because I was a big sort of techie guy. My first techie job was on a TV show called Max Headroom, and because I could speak computerese back then, this was in the 80s, my boss put me on the Star Trek series. So I got to work on all of the Star Trek series from Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and Enterprise, putting in, those Captain to the Bridge or all of the aliens. I could speak Klingon and Ferengi and all of that stuff.
Give us a little Klingon.
Oh, Tuch, Kwala, Kapla.
I love it. Oh, that's awesome, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
It is.
What a great opportunity.
What he say?
So I became a voiceover artist, and today I live in Seattle, near Seattle, and I do voices for video games. I'm on a very popular video game called Team Fortress 2, which you can play online with many other players around the world. And I play a Russian heavy weapons expert and also a Scottish demolitions man.
So I talk like this as Russian heavy weapons guy, and I talk like this as the demo man.
And kids now know me from that, even though their parents might know me from Zoobilee Zoo back in the 80s. So I've had quite an interesting career. I always say I started out as a mime being seen and not heard, and ended my career being heard and not seen.
Oh, that's interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
But now you're still doing something even more amazing. You're teaching, aren't you? You're teaching people how to do this?
So what along the way, one of the great blessings of my life is that I met a woman named Viola Spolin, who created the art form of improvisation in America. She and her son, Paul Sill, started something called the Second City in Chicago. And that gave rise to the whole improvisational theater boom in America, which is still going strong. And I was her sort of teacher, she was my teacher, my friend and protege. She sort of became, in a way, my surrogate mom. And so I go around the world now teaching her specific work, which is a wonderful philosophy of teaching children and adults how to play, because through play and having fun and playing games like theater games, that essential child in you is where your genius lies creatively. And when you go to school, they beat that out of you. So we learn how to not enjoy, to not have fun. So my job basically these days is to go around to various groups, and I've done this for actors and 12-step groups and people in recovery, teaching them how to have fun playing these games that are transformational. As a matter of fact, one of Viola's older students, Alan Alda, teaches her games to scientists to better communicate their work to the public. Oh. So we're both sort of going around the world, Alan Alda and I, in our own ways, teaching the work of Viola Spolin, and that's really been one of the great joys of my life. That, and now I've discovered writing, so I'm becoming an author late in my life. It's my sort of third act.
Well, that Second City television show was one of the funniest on when that was on.
They all began with the work of my teacher. Her book was published in 1963. The very first improv group starred Mike Nichols and Elaine May, Alan Arkin, Alan Alda, all of these greats. And then in subsequent generations, it became Belushi and Aykroyd and Tina Fey and Stephen Colbert. They all got their start in the Chicago improv scene.
Wow. That sounds like a lot of fun, actually. Hey, why don't you teach us one of those days?
It is a lot of fun, and I always tell people, because they say, oh, improv is scary and terrifying, and I said, then you're doing it wrong, because it should be a pure delight.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, let's play a quick game. We're ready.
You want to play a what?
Do you have a quick game that we can play with you?
You want to play a quick game?
Yeah. I want to be a child, too. Bob and I want to revert back.
Okay.
Ready, Bob?
Well,
I'm ready.
Here's a game that I teach writers.
Okay.
Turn to each other and build a story one word at a time as fast as you can. Just go back and forth.
Girls.
You say a word, he says another word, and you add to that word, and go back and forth and see what kind of a story develops. Let me see that.
Okay. We're going to cut us off in a minute, okay? We don't want to get too wordy.
I will.
Here. Okay.
Just word at a time.
We got it. Big.
Girls.
But.
Love.
You.
Make a story. Make a story.
You.
Once there was
Oh, so you need a noun, adjectives, the. Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah.
The
Large.
boy.
Did.
There we go.
Absolutely.
Nothing.
One.
Day.
He.
Decided.
Two.
Walk.
Away.
From.
His girlfriend. Oh, I had 2 words. Oh.
One word.
Okay. Go ahead. We're almost done.
Yeah.
Near.
Near time.
Near time. Container.
Contain. What?
Time container.
Okay, now he confused me. What do I do here? Just make something up?
When you come to a roadblock like that, you got to start again, and that's
okay. We're going to practice this, Bob. This is one that you and I are going to have to work on a little bit, and we might not be able to do this one on television.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun. I just can't guarantee the things that might come out of his mouth, so we're going to...
The world's greatest treasure trove sits in Vatican City, Europe's most famous locale. Because the Vatican is a walled, closely guarded fortress, everyone believes it is impossible to rob. Until now. From the author who brought readers the compelling thrillers Satan's Stronghold, Jericho's Trumpet, The Armageddon Virus, and God's Domain, comes a suspenseful thriller that will keep readers turning pages. A powerful Vatican cardinal is obsessed with becoming the next pope. A young idealistic priest discovers a Vatican conspiracy, plunging he and beautiful Italian gymnast Darlene Aldonzo into a whirlpool of danger and desperation. American jewel thief Craig Reynolds has robbed jewelry establishments and wealthy chateaus all over Europe, aborting the most sophisticated security systems and vanishing without a trace. Now, Craig Reynolds will methodically manipulate the players and events to make the impossible possible. He will rob the Vatican. But will he sacrifice Darlene Aldonzo, the woman he initially deceived, but now loves? Find out in this action-filled thriller novel by Robert Kelland, Rob the Vatican, available on ebook at www.robertkelland.com.
I want to ask you, I do have a question for you, because when I read your book, you had illustrations in there. Who did your illustrations?
What's that?
Who did your illustrations in your book?
Who was my inspiration?
No, illustrations, the drawings.
I'm sorry, you're not coming in clearly.
Who did your illustrations?
Oh, who did my illustrations? Her name is Nicole Armitage, and she was friends with a fellow, one of my friends, where I wrote most of my book, sitting at his kitchen table in Los Angeles. Nicole is a Disney artist. She works at the Disney Imagineering Center, and she and I were friends, and I gave her sort of the images I was thinking of, and she turned them into these fantastic illustrations. She's what you call a concept artist over at Disney, and she works in the theme parks designing, her last project was designing Avatar World. Oh, so wow. I got very lucky to get a really spectacular artist to do my illustrations.
Yes, it kind of makes I mean, of course, I'm supposed to be above the age of picture books, but when there's a couple pictures in there, it gives you form your own thoughts on how the author illustrates the picture, but for the age bracket that you wrote in, especially our middle-aged age bracket, I like to see a picture of the characters, because then it tells me what the author is thinking, you know?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I love that she captured. She used a sort of Norman Rockwell model for this for the boy James, and I gave her a picture of me at age 11. Oh. And basically, he's me, and you could see that opening picture. He's looking a little depressed, yeah. Which I was when I was a kid. But so you know, and then the other characters. Killjoy definitely is based on the graffiti Kilroy was here. From the 1940s, graffiti. Right. Roger kind of reminded me of a Hercule Poirot, with a little mustache.
Yes. Yes.
And so I kind of combined him and Salvador Dali and created a very happy Frenchman. Okay. The goat, Mayor Culpa, is a goat. He's a talking scapegoat. So, A lot of the images I like to leave to the imagination. There's he runs into a lot of funny characters, the nervous Nellies, and a tribe of ninnies, and a lot of people said that that they pictured the characters themselves. So I only put about 15 illustrations in the book just to sort of give the flavor of how I saw it.
It was just enough. It was right on.
Yes, I had been wondering how you came up with a Frenchman for an optimist, but then you explained.
It's interesting. Yeah. So how that came about was I called him Monsieur Roger, and it's because when I started writing the book, I had to go to the thesaurus all the time to find how many ways you can say happy or optimistic. And so, in doing so, I just figured he was Roger's thesaurus was my best friend, and so I named the character Roger.
That makes sense, and one of the reasons I wondered that is we were in Monroe here, and Monroe was originally called Frenchtown until President Monroe came and visited, and then they changed the name to Monroe.
Uh-huh.
Huh. And,
So there are a lot of French people around here.
Uh-huh.
It's really important to me on this show. There's a lot of authors that watch this show, also future authors, present authors. Is there anything that you could give them to take home that could help them open their creative minds, or a structure, or anything that you can give advice to them?
Well, again, I had written a lot of different screenplays and TV episodes, but I had never attempted a novel. Mm-hmm. And I had this idea of kicking around for, like I said, 52 years. When I first wrote it on a dare, basically by a friend who I said, I can't get past 20 pages. He said, I challenge you to do a page a day for a month and get me 30 pages. And I said, you're on. So that challenge opened the gates to a 350-page manuscript.
Wow.
But when I read the manuscript, it was awful. And everybody sort of politely said, good for you. And I realized that I needed to that writing is just a lot more than just simply putting your ideas down. You have to make it something that other people want to read. And so I buckled down. I got a writing mentor. I studied children's authors, my favorite being Roald Dahl. And it took me about 2 years to rewriting that book with a mentor to get it where it was readable. So what I would say to authors is, don't settle for your first draft, and get help. Find a writers group, get support, and if people don't like it, don't lose heart. Writing is a skill you can develop, and I developed it at the age of 60.
Because we talk about this a lot on the show, believe it or not, a lot of authors that come on this show are of age. I mean, we have very few children's authors out there. I'd love to see more, not children's authors, but children that are authors, children that are writing. But I'd love to see that more. But what made you finally, how do you say, my grandma used to say, get off the pot or pee in it? What made you finally do that?
Yeah. It's really the Nike slogan, just do it.
Just do it.
Don't give up.
Yeah.
So easy to give up. So easy to be discouraged.
Yeah.
And so, as an actor, I learned very early that rejection is just part of the game. So, it took me 60 queries to get one publisher interested. They were interested enough to publish my book, but then 6 months later went out of business.
Wow.
And that didn't stop me because I'm now self-publishing.
Right there. There's a big world right now, that a lot of self-publishing books. And,
we're in that really interesting transition. It's the big dog publishers versus the independents. And the independent publishing world is growing, but it needs a lot of more good authors out there to show them that we can compete with the big boys.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. In fact, your book is in a one-way inspiration to authors out there. It's, why be average? Let's all be above average. Let's put our thoughts on paper and see where it goes.
You might think you're average, but if you pursue it, you'll find where you're extraordinary, and everybody has that gift.
That's excellent. I'm glad you said that, because I do feel that about future authors and present authors. Once you fight that fear and you get it on paper and you get it out there, you broke free.
Everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a voice, and it's just a matter of sticking with it.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I mean, you've been a real inspiration. You've been funny. You taught Bob and I a new game. I mean, we have something to do over lunch now. I mean, people might look at us a little weird, but that's not odd.
You can play that anytime.
We're gonna.
Yes, we are going to.
Yeah, we're gonna be calling each other every night trying to play that game. But I do appreciate you being on our show. Unfortunately, it's time for us to sign off, but this has been fabulous. And keep up the good work. And I really am excited to read the sequel of The King of Average.
Thank you. The sequel is going to be very interesting. Yeah.
It did end with a lot of inspiration and very touching, But I have some questions. I don't want to be a spoiler, so I'm not going to bring it out there, but it's definitely worth reading.
You have to read the first book before I can even mention what the premise of the second book is about.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Well, we'll stay in touch. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but
okay.
We're going to talk to you again soon.
The King of Average.
Oh,
Get a copy.
Yes, thank you.
Also, I do the audio book, and it's my voice on the audio book. So I'm a professional voice actor. You'll enjoy it in the car as well.
Just as much.
That's my pitch.
Thank you. Hold that book up again, please. Right up to the screen. The King of Average.
All right.
I love it. Okay, thank you, Gary. And we will talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will talk soon.
It's a pleasure.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
And we'll be right back after this. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today on APN TV Media, your author-publisher network. It was a really great show today. If you didn't catch it, rewind because you want to watch this one. It was Gary Schwartz, the King of Average. What did you think, Bob?
I thought it was a great show.
We actually
enjoyed it.
Yes, I enjoyed the game, and I can't wait to get started with...
You.
No, the game. You're supposed to say the game, Bob. That's okay.
All
We
right.
got time to work on it, maybe on another show. We'll come back and show you how professional we really are. Join us next time on APN TV Media. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
All right.
There's a place inside my mind unseen, dreams of you and I that just can't be, but I can keep them safe and locked away inside. In a perfect world where I control it, give me your heart there and I would hold it, but I I know that just can't be reality. But please, don't you wake my daydream, 'cause it's so real it seems. Maybe someday I'll get my head from the clouds, but for now I'll just daydream. If you said to jump, then I will do it. Right into the fire and walk straight through it. And if you knew, I bet that's just what you would say. I guess the only thing for me to do is never let you know just how I'm feeling, 'cause I don't want to know if you don't feel the same. It's a shame. Don't you wake my daydream, 'cause it's so real it seems. Maybe someday I'll get my head from the clouds, but for now I'll just daydream. 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 There's a place inside my mind unseen, dreams of you and I that just can't be, but I can keep them safe and locked away inside, inside. But don't you wake my daydream. Oh, so real it seems. Maybe someday I'll get my head from the clouds, but for now I'll just daydream. Don't you wake my daydream.